Hi class, so today we'll be talking about the causes and consequences of the Enlightenment movement. Now what I'll be doing is I'll be going through the events that happened during this movement, and those will directly correlate with the causes and consequences. So if you don't know what the Enlightenment movement was, it was a movement that was begun by writers and scholars who believed that human beings could apply critical reasoning spirit to every problem they encountered in this world. These writers and scholars really pushed for individualistic thinking, and they created a new secular, scientific, and critical attitude that scrutinized a lot of things, from government to the role of women in society, the organization of society, and even with the religions. So an important term for us to note in this is philosophers. These were the writers of the Enlightenment, or at least what they called themselves. And these people, in comparison to philosophers, the philosophers concern themselves with solving real problems in the world. The philosophers concern themselves with abstract theories. So the philosophers were really united through their ideals of reason and reform and freedom. And those really kind of connected with the individualistic view that they tried to get across society. They used reason to attack superstition, bigotry, and religious fanaticism, which those were all somewhat causes of the Enlightenment period, because they all correlated with what was being told to the population at that time. The churches gave them these crazy ideas, and people were told not to think about it, just take what is told to you. And the superstition, bigotry, and religious fanaticism, those are really the obstacles of free thought and social reform, which was what the philosophers actually were going for. So our next point is the popularization of science during this period. So during the 1700s, mathematics and science became extremely popular in society, to the point where the public was actually attending scientific lectures on new scientific discoveries. And all of these writers and scholars of the Enlightenment period really celebrated the new scientific discoveries and these scientists that discovered them, because they were pushing the bar of what was known before. And through each discovery was a new standard that was set. So the writers and scholars of this period saw the scientific method as a solution for all the problems. And they really took it as, if you don't understand this, use science, just try to back up what you think with science and knowledge. So this new increase of scientific love in society kind of created a skeptical attitude towards religion because of it. And in turn kind of worried the state authorities, because that skepticism of religion, which they ran off of, really threatened to undermine their power, the state power. So, discoveries in geology really bothered them, because there were some discoveries that showed marine fossils that dated back further than the biblical flood suggested. And that really messed with religion's view in the population, because that was something that didn't match with what they were being told for so long. And because of these new scientific discoveries, especially due to Isaac Newton's belief that God's intervention in the universe was unnecessary, it really led to the creation of atheists and deists. And atheists are people that don't believe in God, and deists believe there could be a God, but he doesn't have any correlation with what happens in the universe. And those two forms of religion, so to speak, really kind of bounced off of this new scientific discovery. And since the church held such enormous power in society, criticisms towards religion were quite daring, because usually the churches were coincided with the government. And so through criticizing religion, you would in turn be, sent to jail or tortured. So important people to note are Pierre Bayle. He is a French Huguenot refugee, and he led an internationally influential campaign against religious intolerance, which is huge at this point, because no state in Europe had officially put in place complete tolerance. But the only one that actually had was the Dutch Republic, which was where he was a refugee too. Pierre Bayle he published 2 books or journals, and one was News from the Republic of Letters, and that really criticized the government of France at the time. And he also published another one called Historical and Critical Dictionary, and this really cited all the errors and delusions that he could find in the past and present writers of religions. So that really didn't set well with the churches of this time, and it really kind of gave people a way to look at new knowledge and correlate that with what they had been told. So since he found all these errors and delusions, that kind of increased the skepticism amongst people. And he was really the initial force in inciting other scholars to look at the Bible and criticize it and its authority towards everybody. So it definitely played a big role on society and the religious aspect of it. Another person to note is Voltaire, who was one of the most influential writers of the early Enlightenment period. He wrote Letters Concerning the English Nation, and that was one of his most popular writings because it devoted chapters to the scientist Isaac Newton and philosopher John Locke. And he used the virtues of the British as a way to attack the Catholic bigotry and government rigidity in France. So France didn't really like this because he really put them in the dump. Like, he told everything that was wrong with them and compared them to a better society. So he was ordered for arrest in France. So he actually spent 2 years in exile in Britain because of this. He also wrote another book called Elements of the Philosophy of Newton, and because he really idolized Newton and all of his scientific discoveries. And this is important since the French state, along with many other European theologians, considered Newtonism threatening because it glorified the human mind. And they didn't want people to think that they could think of this time period. They wanted them to take what they told them. So it really seemed to reduce God to an abstract, external, rationalistic force. And that just did not sit right with the governments or the churches. So our next part is literacy. And previous to this movement, there was not a lot of literacy in society. There was the church, the people of the churches, and the people of the government, and usually people that were wealthy had, like the nobility, had some knowledge and some literacy. But during this time period, the middle class actually started getting more literate. And because of this expanding knowledge, the skepticism on religion and government expanded more. And because of this literacy, writings, people could actually look at books and understand what the knowledge was that was being told to them. So there was actually an encyclopedia that a bunch of writers came together and gathered all the knowledge about science, religion, industry, and society in general. And that really shows how literate the society was, because for people to understand that book, it had to go to more than just the few nobility that there was. And a lot of philosophers believe that the spread of knowledge would encourage reforms like intellectual freedom, freedom of the press, and freedom of religion. So this movement kind of created some of the ideas of society we have today. And they actually, during this time period, there was also salons that were created. And these aren't like hair salons. They were actually intellectual life and reform movement gatherings. So philosophers and nobility and other people would all come together and basically just talk about what they know and what they found. And it was really revolutionary because not a lot of people did that previously. That was one of the causes of the Enlightenment, was that people didn't get to talk about their knowledge and they didn't get to learn about new things. It was the government that told them new things, and they didn't get to think about them. So a lot of people in this time period really took literacy by the hand, and they enjoyed it. And also, women's roles in society changed during this movement, or were questioned during this movement. There was always feminist ideas that were out there, but during the Enlightenment, they were actually presented systematically for the first time, which challenged more the traditionalist societies. Most of the male writers actually felt women as being less capable of reasoning, and this kind of comes as part of Aristotle's view that men were the ones who created life. Women just carried the baby. Men were the ones who put the baby in them. And during this time period, the doctrine of oviism was actually created by physicians and surgeons that recognized that the female egg was essential in reproduction, which kind of gave women a more role in society, even though it's more of just biological. And also in this time period, women began to move out of the control of their families and seek sexual fulfillment, which they never really were able to do previously. So the spread of Enlightenment created, just kind of like an overview, they created a middle class that was educated and eager to learn more ideas. And the Enlightenment really flourished in so many places, from London, Amsterdam, and Paris, and kind of diffused to the Eastern and Southern Europe and North America. And some areas didn't embrace it as much as others, but a majority began to get the ideas. Because of the Enlightenment, though, one of the consequences was the rebellions against state power. So the governments were being held more accountable for their actions because everybody was more knowledgeable. And this often led to riots. Food riots were very common, especially in Britain and France in the last half of the 18th century. And peasant uprisings became popular because of the population growth and inflation and the extension of the market system. They didn't really have, it kind of pushed them to the side. And so because all these people started getting more educated and the Enlightenment ideas trickled down and Enlightenment effects trickled down, the riots really started happening because people were like, we want change, we want reform. And the rise of public opinion caused many problems for European politics because people started taking part in them. They started looking at it and going, well, we don't like this, why don't we do this? And in order for the monarchs to keep their power, they had to show the public that they were willing to reform. But those reforms weren't necessarily what the people wanted or thought they wanted. So this leads me into my next point about the reforms. So an influential writer called Adam Smith, he endorsed a concept called laissez-faire, which means in French to leave alone. And he wrote that the government neither controls or intervenes in the economy during this. So we can kind of see from that one of the causes of Enlightenment, because the government was in control of everything, from the religion of the state to what businesses were allowed in the state to, what money they wanted this to, or how much they wanted this to cost. So through all of these ideas, you can kind of see where they were previously, because all these ideas were built off of the problems they had. So some of the rulers actually turned the Enlightenment reforms to improve their life for their subjects and to gain commercial and military advantage towards their rival states. These people are called Enlightenment despots because they didn't want to give up their absolutist powers. And that was a real problem of the Enlightenment period, because a lot of these monarchs, they understood where the people were coming from, and they went and tried to do these reforms to keep them happy, but they didn't want to give up their power. And they knew if they give up a little bit more of their power, it's just going to take them down. So after the aftermath of the 7 Years' War, where all these states started fighting with each other, rulers actually appointed reform-minded ministers and gave them a mandate to modernize government and to make tax increases look better to the public, because they were poor after 7 years of fighting. So they needed to raise taxes, but they didn't want to make the public mad. So they really kind of used the reforms to just sugarcoat what they were doing. And there was also good reforms that came out of this, though. There was legal reforms of the judicial system and law codes that were often flawed. So those are good parts, as well as educational reforms. So like state subsidies for local schools, as well as mandatory schooling for kids, which was super revolutionary for this time period because they never had that before. Kids didn't have to go to school. Especially, this helps with creating literacy in the younger generations and really setting the stage for literacy of all the population soon. My next point is the American Revolution, which is one of the revolutions that came out of all these riots. So the American Revolution was off in North America, so separate from Europe, but it kind of was based off of the Enlightenment ideas that had culturally diffused over there from trading and just everybody going back and forth and traveling. So especially with books, and so the American Revolution was the growth of it basically was based off of the growth of informed public opinion that had a huge impact on these colonies because people, since they were more literate, they could understand that they were not being treated as they would like to be. So the revolution was basically caused over the struggle over the British Parliament's right to tax, and they initiated basically a full-scale war off of that because they had no representation in Parliament, so Parliament could tax them as much as they want. And especially after the 7 Years' War, they wanted to tax them a lot. So, and that's really what caused the problem for the colonies, and they in turn got their independence from Britain and created the United States. When Britain actually threatened to use their force to maintain control after putting these taxes on them, the colonists were extremely mad. So that's what caused the fighting, and they soon after created the Declaration of Independence. And this war really showed that once put into practice, Enlightenment ideas could have revolutionary implications. These ideas came from Europe, but they affected the people in North America and ultimately caused their independence. And we see that with Haiti as well, with, the L'Ouverture's Haitian Constitution that soon came after. That actually, shows their independence from France, and they did not want to be a part of their mother country anymore because of all of the imperialistic rulers. And this time period really was big. The Enlightenment period was really big for thinking individually. So they didn't want to have someone over top of them saying, do this and do that, if the colony or settlement itself could not think for themselves. And many Europeans actually saw the American Revolution as a triumph for Enlightenment ideas because it was like they all funneled into that. And it produced a revolutionary wave of revolutions. So, everyone from France to, all the other places in Europe and Poland, and they all started seeing how the American Revolution and how other revolutions affected them, and realizing that we don't like how our government is now, so we're going to take these ideas and we're going to run with them, and we're going to make our own government. And you can really see that in France's revolution as well, because they took a state that was in awful standing with food, like not enough food, and a real big difference between the wealthy and the poor with how they can eat and how they can supply themselves. We can see the difference of that versus after the revolution, when everybody united to create a republic. Everybody came together, and there was more unity in the state. So these revolutions were the consequences of the Enlightenment, because the ideas of the Enlightenment were based off of all of the problems of previous societies. So the Enlightenment really just created a basis for people to say, we want what is best for us. And I think the Enlightenment really helped create the world that we live in today, because the ideas of individualism are so strong today, just as they were then, or trying to make them then. So I hope that this video was very informational for you, and thank you for listening. My name is Cote, Thank you.